Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're enjoying yourself and hope you can find something interesting in this video as I share it with you. In this video I am going to focus on actually pouring the clear coat. So let's back up for just a second. To this point we've got the plaque designed. We've actually flattened the board. We've cut the first pocket for a clear coat for our pre-coat to stop wicking. And from this point on we now need to calculate the resin quantity. Then we need to pour the resin, let the resin harden, and once the resin's hardened we need to carve the black pocket and then pour the black. So we'll see how long this video is and whether I get all the way through pouring the black or if I stop after I have carved the black. We'll see how long the video is by the time I get done carving the black, and if appropriate then we'll go ahead and pour the black. I've produced an earlier video using an Excel spreadsheet which I've given out to dozens of people already that helps me walk through how I calculate the amount of epoxy I need to use. So I use that same spreadsheet, but I did add a formula in there that I didn't have before, and that is a formula for the volume of a cylinder. And I use the Excel spreadsheet to determine how much a clear epoxy I would need. And wouldn't you know it, I left off the conversion factors, so you're going to see in this video a lot of clear epoxy left over. So if you're wondering how come I mixed up so much, it was actually an error to figure out when I went to pour the black. So with that, with me introducing the pour of the clear coat.
At this point in the process, we're getting ready to pour the epoxy. And I'm not sure how well the camera will show up, but we're going to pour about 10 ounces. I've calculated what that is. We're going to measure how much on a scale that I have here, and we'll mix it up in this bucket. And then we'll pour it here, and we'll start the actual bubble heating and popping process and wait for this epoxy to clear. Not very exciting at this time, but just wanted to show the process. We'll get ready to pour the clear epoxy on a board that you can't see on the camera right now, and I'll focus it down after this intro. Okay, we're at the point we want to pour this epoxy. So I'm going to weigh it out over here. I want 5.46 ounces of resin and 4.54 ounces of hardener. Thing for this setup is I want to make sure that my board is level. So I will check my level right now and put shims underneath it if necessary. So I'm measuring the board in this direction, and it's perfectly level in this direction. Level in that direction. It needs a little propping up in this direction. It's a little low on the back side. That's level. And now that's level on that side. Level on that side. Level on that side, a little more. It looks pretty level. I'll still have to watch it. I've got stir sticks available. So the first thing I like to pour is actually my resin. So I'll put my measuring cup, I'll turn it on, I'll make sure it's zeroed out. Now I'll pour my resin to 5.46 ounces. Let me get a paper towel to wipe things up if I start to spill a little bit. I'm right at 5.5 ounces. Now I'm going to re-zero this. And I'm going to go to 4.6 ounces on this scale. So that should be the right mix. So now it's time to mix up the resin. Normally I just use a popsicle stick, but in this case I'm going to use this bigger stick. It's harder to see the resin being mixed. The way you tell with this Upstart epoxy that you've got it mixed up enough is that it goes from a cloudy look to an actual look where it's clear. So I'm taking time to wipe it off the sides and mix everything up nice and thorough. Nothing tricky about this. This is just one clear coat, no swirl, nothing else. The key is making sure that you have this stuff mixed properly and thoroughly. So I'm coming along the sides and making sure I get it all mixed in. Pull the stream up, and it's looking pretty clear right now. All the cloudiness is for bubbles. So this should pretty much be ready to pour. Almost impossible for me. So now we're going to go ahead and pour. And I should have more than I need. I always calculate a little over Pour and let it spread out a little. And now the key is just watching it so that it doesn't overflow too bad. Sometimes things don't work quite like you thought. Maybe you watched my previous video when I wasn't paying attention and the black went way over the sides. And I'll apply the first torch. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a whole bunch of bubbles. Get this. But as you can see, it doesn't take much. That's it, and now I will come back in about 15 minutes and hit it with the torch again. And all of the bubbles are gone at this time, and we'll watch how it forms others. You can already see the clear actually weaving in to the edge grain here. And if that was black or another color, it would be really obvious. When we get all said and done, the clear won't be as obvious when we get it finished. Okay, time to do another bubble popping. You can see, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, these bubbles here and bubbles in here. All right, now it's the next morning at 6 a.m. I poured this about noon yesterday. Maybe 1 o'clock, and I need to check for hardness for carving today. And the way I do that is I take my thumb and I try to put it in, and I can see a slight indent mark. I guess I can't really capture it very well on my camera, so I'm going to wait at least another couple hours before I carve the black into it. I want it nice and hard. Feels hard, but it's just a little bit on the soft side. A couple hours later, the board was nice and hard. About 12 o'clock that afternoon, so about 24 hours after I had originally poured it, somewhere close to that. And so I was ready to start carving, and you can see how clear the board actually looks. That didn't have any bubbles. It was clear and ready to go. You might want to take a look at the areas where the wicking from the clear moved out there. That's actually wicking, and that's what this clear coat will prevent. So this mahogany, if I'd have been using black, it definitely would have wicked out into the wood if I didn't pre-coat it well enough. And you could have done it with a brush and clear epoxy, and that works most of the time. But sometimes that doesn't seal it all the way. There are other ways people profess, but Shane is an advocate these days for pouring a full clear pocket. And you can see by pouring a full clear pocket that the color will not be able to wick out past that last 0.05 inches of clear. And that clear won't show up when you do the finishing. It just will be a thin little line of clear that's the same color as the wood and the finish and everything else. You won't really see that clear. So it's a good idea, and I'm following Shane's advice if you're wondering why we're pouring the full pocket. And now we'll move on to carving in the clear epoxy for a black pour. Okay, as we prepare for carving into the clear for our black, I just want to cover a couple key things. I'm not going to go a lot into the software. We've already set up our black toolpath. Let's take a review of that. So I'm not going to go through each of these setups. We already did that in an earlier video. What I want to point out is we are now set up, and we're using a 30-degree V-bit for the outer pocket ring, and we're using a clearance tool, the same one we actually used for the clear cut. No reason to calculate it. And the only thing I want to point out is remember that that tool path is coming out 0.05 inches into what the white ring would normally be. And the white ring, when we pour that in the end, will be 0.05 inches within the black pocket.
Recall that is the overlap issue. We want a nice crisp line between the white and the black, and that overlap will ensure that. So I wanted to just point that out as a key area, because Shane and I often talk about overlap, and this is a simple one. In other more complicated vectors, there may be several overlaps because there could be several different colors or outlines in black. But in this one, there's just a simple overlap of 0.05 right here.
We're at a point in the video where we've put the clear coat into the wood, and our next step is to actually carve the black layer, which will be the background that we carve the white into. So we're at the point where we're getting ready to do that, and we'll start setting up the machine and making that carve here. So the first thing we need to do as we set up this carve is we've replaced the board in the machine with the XY and everything in place. I did a real quick check off camera to make sure my XY hasn't changed. I didn't adjust it, and I wouldn't adjust it, but I just wanted to make sure there isn't something that happened that doesn't make sense. So I've done that. Our next step in the process then is to go back to the area that we previously marked on where we're zeroing our board.
There's a little X right here on the board. I'm going to line above that X, and I'm going to move the bit down. And remember, we always start with our V-bits when we do our cars. Shane and I both start with the V-bit. So we're going to come down and zero off the top of the board. Make sure everything's tight. That's good right there, Z0.
So everything should be set up to go ahead and run that next toolpath.
Now we're at the point we're actually going to carve it in with the, we've got everything zeroed out, and it's time to actually carve the material. So I'm going to go ahead, and now that I've got everything set up, I'm going to go ahead and put the dust collection on, and it'll get noisy when I start carving.
What I'm going to look for is that the first cut is about just out here somewhere, because I'm using the V-bit, and it should just have enough left over for the white outer ring. So I always prepare by thinking about what I want to actually see as the bit starts cutting.
So the next step is to change the bit over to the 1/4 inch end mill.
The black will come right here. The next one, the white, will come right here. And so now it's time to brush this out, clean this up, and go take it to pour the black.
So what I'm going to do before I actually pour the black is I'm going to clean out this loose stuff. So I've just got a little pick thing here, and I'm coming along the edge here. And I'm just scraping it out so that it doesn't end up floating into my black epoxy when I pour it. So it's nice to have a nice clean edge. So I'm not applying any pressure to it, just a little light pulse. And then I'll make sure that it's nice and clean for my black pour when I take it up into my office to pour it. Well, I think that's probably too much fun for today, so we'll leave this video off with everything prepared to pour the black. Since starting this video, I now have all the colors actually poured. My next step is just to wait for the white to harden and then actually do the milling and finishing. So this should be done in the next day or two without any problem, and the series wrapped up by the end of this weekend, if not sooner. That's my goal. Let's review a couple things that I think are worth highlighting from this video. We started out with pouring the clear epoxy. We left off last time with flattening the board and having the carved pocket for the clear epoxy, which forms our coat for preventing wicking outside the actual graphic. So we poured that clear, and you saw that I used the epoxy calculator, my spreadsheet, to do that, and I had a formula error, and that's why I had too much. So we calculated the volume of the epoxy, then we made sure it was level. For those of you that have seen my previous video, I had in my last video my black overflow the edge and make a mess, so I was going to make sure I didn't do that. So it's really important to make sure your board is absolutely level and that you're paying attention to that. Then the next thing was, after I poured the epoxy, was popping the bubbles. And when you're popping the bubbles, you do that about every 15 minutes until you don't see any more bubbles, say for the first hour, maybe half hour to hour, depending on what type of epoxy you're using. With the pre-coat, the way we did, the subsequent pores don't generate as much bubbles as that first clear coat did. That's an advantage of pouring that clear pocket. So remember, when you're popping those bubbles, it's a quick evolution with your torch. It is not something that you pour over, because you can cook that resin. I can't overemphasize that because I've done that myself in the past. Really just do a quick pass and don't stay in any one spot, and then you move on. And then you come back 15 minutes later and see if there's any bubbles, and if there is, hit it with another torch real quick, but don't stay on it. Then you have to make sure that the epoxy is completely hardened. I've had a few people send me information that are started on these journeys, and they get impatient and they start carving their epoxy before it's actually hard. And they thought it was hard, so I talked to them about the thumbnail test and how to check whether it's hard or not hard. And the last thing I want you to understand is that you can get into a situation, if you didn't measure your epoxy right or the other conditions aren't there, where your epoxy never actually gets hard. So make sure you're actually testing to see your epoxy hard enough to carve in, because if it's not, it makes a really gooey, gummy mess as you start to try to carve it. I hope you picked up a thing or two if you were watching, and I hope you have a great day, and I appreciate your support. And any likes, shares, or comments would be appreciated. And until we meet on this channel again, I plan on releasing a video, hopefully tomorrow. Have a good day.